soon as I posted that I wanted to do this, Tony got on to me right away and said, hey, can we do it at Wizard Lake? And Landon, of course, graciously enough said yes. So they're supplying.
Sorry, everyone, we lost sound from you.
I don't have any sound here either.
So that they can't hear us either.
Wear a headset now. I'll probably just improve my looks. We're going to try a headset now. It's weird because it feeds back at me.
Perfect.
Okay. So I was talking about off-airport landings. Often I have pictures like this on AGA, and everybody comments to me like, "What are you doing? How'd you get there?" I get a lot of PMs, people asking me questions about this, so I got enough of them gathered up. I thought, well, let's do a presentation and try and answer everybody's questions. So today, what we're going to go through is the equipment, what you need to do this, you're flying, what you need to be prepared to do, how you select your landing section or selection. What if something goes wrong? How are you prepared for that? And I got a little bonus. We'll put in some ski flying discussion. Winter is coming and lots of folks love ski flying. You know, I was thinking back when I did my very first off-airport landing. I used to own a 172, and you could probably say my first one was on frozen lakes in the north. And I never really considered them off airport landings, mostly because somebody'd scraped the area. I had someone to phone to find out the wind and everything. So what I really consider off airport landings is there's no windsock, no prepared strip. It's an area that you wouldn't consider for airport operations. Oh, we got the wrong page up. So what do I need to do that? Everybody's reading my notes. What can they see? Okay, well, let's see what we got wrong there. Still not, eh? Let's do this and then do that. There we go. Sorry about that. We had to do a little reset there. Tech. I knew tech was going to get me today. I don't mind doing it in person here, but what I'm trying, this is my first attempt to do it, a big presentation like this online. So as I mentioned, I don't consider Ram Falls, Clearwater, Red Deer Forestry, those kind of airports off airport. I know many folks do, but all of them, someone's looking after them. You can generally figure out a wind direction. There'll be a wind sock or something out there. So for this next slide, we're just going to talk about what type of equipment do we need. And I want to assure you guys, folks, almost every one of us are flying airplanes that were designed in an era where there wasn't that many runways. So if you think about it, I don't know, a couple of you've got an air coupe in the room. They were built in the 40s. There wasn't too many runways around in the 40s, so people were using grass fields and such. So the airplanes really are designed for it. What I'm talking about is kind of going one step further where it's a bit rougher. So first thing I'd like to talk about is before you go venturing off into the wilderness, do you trust your airplane? And I'm not talking about just an annual inspection. I'm talking about your last run up. Did you have a bad mag drop? Does it run well in slow flight? How is your airplane working for you? So I want you to make sure before you venture off into the woods where you can't maybe have cell phone coverage or anything, you want to have an airplane that you trust. And I think most of us in the room want to have an airplane you can trust, but it's different if you're just flying from Ponoka to Lacombe than if you're flying off onto a riverbank or a field out in the middle of nowhere. So talk about suspension. Almost none of our airplanes have suspension, right? And I mean, we look at this fella here. Most of you know him, Mike Patey. Sorry for the grainy photo. I wasn't able to capture a real good one, but he spent more on suspension on that airplane than I have into my total airplane. So, I mean, I once upon a time I fell in love with the Super Stol with the nice tall suspension, but same thing. I've got an airplane that's worth a quarter of that, and I still get by. So we want suspension on the airplane, and we want good prop and rock clearance. So here's what the Vagabond looked like when I first flew it. So I've got a metal prop. In this case, I think I put 8x6s on it. And basically, this is what it looks like today. I'm missing, in this picture, I'm missing the vortex generators. But one of the big things I did for suspension is fat tires. So these tires are 26 inches, nothing like the 35s you see on some of the guys, but even 26 inches, I have no worries about going off field with it. We've talked about a buddy of mine, he's got 8.5s by 6s, and they actually aren't that much different. So even 8.5s are a good tire choice. But if you've got 5-inch rubber, it's pretty tough. Again, I mean, the average airplane really doesn't have suspension. I've had a couple calls lately from guys with RVs wanting to go off field, and I mean, what do you do with them? Put 26s on them, now you got some suspension, you lose a lot of speed. It's really not the airplane for it. But most of you here know, I mean, Rob Japp's in the room, he's got a 172, he spends lots of time off field with that airplane. And he's got 6x6s all the way around, right? Doesn't have even 8x6s. Next year, yeah. I mentioned, so on this airplane, I put a 3-blade prop on it. A couple things that did for me. One is it gave me more prop clearance. It also ended up giving me more thrust. I picked up performance. I put on a tail wheel suspension. If you can see in the picture, the tail wheel's different. When I first got this plane and I did my first off-field landing, it just rattled me. So I put on this Alaska suspension, and it isn't cheap, but it's still way cheaper than what Mike Patey put together, and it really did tame it down. It doesn't rattle anymore. And I mentioned I also put on vortex generators. Lots of folks ask me, well, what did that do for you? Well, here's the actual numbers. So before, I'd stall at 52 mile an hour. After, I stall at 45 miles an hour. I can now fly around all day at 45 miles an hour doing 30-degree banks, and it doesn't bother me. It really, not that the Vagabond was not a tame airplane, but it really did tame it down. My stall isn't really a stall now. I can't spin it. I've tried full throttle, crank it back, kick the rudder over. It just kind of falls down and keeps flying. Power on stall went from 48 miles an hour to 38. So what this really did for me though was on the approach side. So if you look, before my approach speed was 62 miles an hour, now I can drop it down to 54. That's almost 10 miles an hour reduction, which really shortens your landing roll. Gave me a much more confidence. Same with takeoff. I used to have to rotate at 55 miles an hour, and now I rotate at 45 miles an hour. And yeah, there's a price to pay. I used to cruise at 97 miles an hour. Now I cruise at 95. Yeah, I'm a screaming airplane out there. But honestly, I've got big fat tires hanging on it. I've got an oil cooler um, hanging underneath it there. So there's nothing clean about this airplane. So maybe if I'd have started with a clean airplane, I might have lost maybe 5 miles an hour with the VGs. Sorry, just checking my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, yeah. So on this airplane, the question for those of you online, if you couldn't hear it, was did I have to upgrade the brakes when I increased the tire size? Um, I'm over braked on this airplane. So this airplane was designed around the old Goodyear inflatable brakes. When I built it, I put the double caliper Clevelands on it, which is too much brake normally, but with the fat tires, it seems to work just fine. So yeah, it's got double pucks already, so it's got good brakes. But yeah, if you did upgrade the normal Cub, you would be struggling a bit, but won't hold it. But honestly, I rarely use the brakes on this thing. Today I landed here and I put on the brakes to make the first turn, and I was just sliding because it's snowy out. So other things we'll just talk about if you're ready for off-airport landings is what you should bring with you. Everybody has a cell phone. It's great if you're in cell phone coverage areas. If you're not, it's not so great. So most of us, or lots of, for the tracking. So does it work even if you don't have towers? Okay. Yeah. That still makes me wonder why we have ELTs then, but okay. So the comment in the room was if you have a cell phone, uh, search and rescue can track that. I also carry a spot. This is the one that you can send messages with. Some folks have the Garmin InReach. You'll find something with me. I'm the typical pilot. I'm as cheap as they come, so I fly with Spot because the subscription's cheaper than InReach. I fly with Garmin Pilot because the subscription's cheaper than ForeFlight. So as cheap as I can go, whatever I can put in the gas tank. Isn't that handy, eh? So, yeah. I mean, so the comment in the room was that the Spot, they've had a few failures when they've pushed SOS. The one thing that I love about the Spot or the Garmin is when I file a flight plan, my link is there, so at least they can see the direction I'm flying. I figure that's still 10 times better than the ELT that doesn't do anything until I'm down. So either Garmin or Spot. And again, I have heard better things about the Garmin InReach. That's correct. Yeah, I mean, I can't say enough good about Garmin. I wish it was all cheaper, but but yeah. So that was just Sheldon was mentioning he uses the Garmin InReach. He's never had troubles with it. Sorry, I got to repeat it for the folks online because we don't have a mic in the room. But yeah, I mean, I always recommend a GPS tracker of some kind if you're going to get off into the bush. I'm with you, Dustin. If it doesn't work, it sure doesn't do you much good. But again, I'm hoping my track gets people close to me. Well, and I know I read on Spot for sure. I don't know if I read about Garmin, but they say right in the instructions you got to get to an open area. So if you can't get there, I guess you're no worse than you were before. But nope. We're talking about off-field operations. You want your airplane as light and as simple as possible here. And the best weight loss program for my airplane is me. But I can't help me, so I help the airplane. But no, I mean, ADS-B, if we're going to talk about that for the general tracking, I'm 100% there. I'm also not going to talk about ELTs. I'm going to talk, everybody has to have an ELT in their plane. You could have ADS-B, and I love ADS-B. Um, I can't believe our government can't get on board with it replacing ELTs, but that's another couple years they will. An emergency kit. So you look at a day like today, and what are you going to do if you get down and you can't get out? What have you got on board? Um, it is worth thinking about it. We don't go flying to plan to crash, but we all say it. Dress like you're going to end up in the bush. I mean, today I've got lined pants on and a heavier jacket. I learned that from 2 days ago because Sheldon showed up at my place when we went flying and he kept pushing off my heater and I kept pulling it on because I was freezing. He was dressed to crash. I wasn't. Um, but what do you got in your kit? I mean, I'm not going to prescribe what you need, but I know here a while ago I was looking at a Super Cub and he had strapped to his wing a hatchet. And I do have a hatchet in the back. I've got water, I've got rope. Today I call it a shelter. I don't think I'd like to live in it very long, but I've got my engine tent with me. I guess I could survive for a couple hours, right? But I mean, it's yeah. So online there, Rob Japp was just mentioning he carries a kit, and I mean, Rob is an example of being prepared always. I think part of it's his job that he does for a living too, but he's got a survival kit that he can last 3 days and he can be comfortable. Um, and that's a real good way of looking at it. And when I travel into the mountains, I have that same type of kit. So, what else? Oh, yeah. Now, what about a life jacket? So I have here a little life jacket I wear, and some of the cases I end up in places I probably shouldn't. As I mentioned to some people, what I'm doing today is everything I've done wrong. We're going to talk about it because I don't want you doing it. So, one of my first off field landings, I was at a lake, beside a lake, and I landed no problem. And I got out and I stepped in about 2 inches of mud. It took me almost 1800 RPM to taxi. So my landing was good, but my takeoff took a little bit longer, and I ended up having to use the lake to get off the water. And if you look in that picture, I've got the life jacket on because I'm definitely not within gliding distance. So a helmet can be real controversial. Um, But those of you that fly for a living, and there's at least one in the room, I see he not only wears his helmet when he's flying for a living, but he's also wearing it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dustin, but you also wear it when you're kind of bush flying. So Dustin was just sharing with the room about what helmet he wears, and that his new airplane he can't wear it, so he's looking at a different helmet. Um, I now can wear like a climbing helmet because I'm using the plug-in headphones. My fear always was trying to get a helmet that had nice noise canceling. But I mean, there's a real good YouTube video of a guy. He flies back into the bush, lands on a river, a gravel bar, and then he pulls out of his back seat of his airplane all his helmets. Like he wears one when he's bicycling, right? Same with me. He wears one when he's skating. Yep, me too. Right? All these things he wears a helmet, and he said, why wouldn't sorry, rock climbing, like all these things. So I'm not going to tell you need a helmet. I mean, I've got a pretty good bruise on my head today. I was running an excavator and I slid down a hill a little bit and banged my head into the side of the window, and I was wishing I had a helmet on yesterday, but I'm probably not going to wear one when I'm running the tractor and stuff. But I mean, like if you do what Dustin did, like a simple climbing helmet, all of a sudden it's not so bad. Does anyone know the company that has helmets that fit the different headsets, either online or in the room? Yeah, yeah. Sky Cowboys. Yeah. So we're just talking about the price of helmets, and Dustin shared that His flying is one he uses for spraying is a $5,000 helmet, but we can get them down cheaper. And I mean it's an individual preference, right? There's no law about wearing a helmet, etc. on there. Yeah, so Rob brought his emergency kit. Show you how much it weighs. It isn't. It really isn't that bad. It maybe weighs what, 15 pounds. So that's the kit there. He's got a nice little backpack. Sorry, front of the projector. There we are. Yeah, we can do that afterwards. Go through. So the last one is always a fun one, and that's have you talked to your insurance company? Those of you carrying hull insurance on your airplanes, um, you might be surprised that you want to go play around like I am, you don't have insurance. Uh, so because Dustin of guys like us, and not so much me, but I'm going to blame you, the a buddy of mine or a friend of mine the other day, he came to me and he said he tried to get hull on his home built Super Cub. Now let's say this airplane's worth $80,000. His other airplane's a PA-39. He may be online, so hopefully I'm not lying when I lie. But let's say his PA-39 is worth about 200,000. It's a de-iced airplane. They want more for hull on the home-built Super Cub than they do on the PA-39, and that's just changed this year. And I'm blaming all the stole competitions for it, but it is there's I mean uh, you put an airplane like the Vagabond out there right now for sale, people are just grabbing them. Everybody wants to do the off-field work, the get back into the mountains, get on the gravel bars. So there's been some incidents and lots of insurance claims. So I'll give you a hint. I don't have hull on my airplane, so if I ding it up out there, I'll fix it. For everything. Yeah. But you look at $9,000 for your Super Cub, and over 10 years, that's $90,000. That airplane's going to last for 30 years. Like you're paying more for insurance than you are for the airplane. Drives me nuts. Any questions about aircraft, equipment? Okay, we'll move on. Now what I want to talk about is you guys and gals. Are you ready for off airport? The To be honest, the aircraft is really a minor part of the equation. Um, it's what you do, how you fly. So for example, have you practiced lately slow flight stalls and spins? I do slow flight almost every single flight in the Vagabond because that's the regime I need to be in if I'm down, going to be landing in some of the areas I land in. I know people get nervous when I mean I do some instructing as well, and I'm sitting in the right seat, and as soon as that stall horn goes off, I see pilots starting to sweat. And that's okay, right? We're not supposed to be in that regime. But if you can get comfortable there, you know what your airplane will do. When you stall it, does it drop a wing? Does it stall straight ahead? How does it stall with 1500 RPM, 1800, 2000 RPM, 2400 RPM, right? Like, know your airplane. And that's really what this slide's all about. Short field work. So one thing that I didn't put the link in here, but if you Google on YouTube one of the Flight Chops video, which is how do STOL pilots train for backcountry flying, Carbon Cub FX3. So Flight Chops fella, which I've forgotten his name, he went down to the Carbon Cub, one of the Carbon Cub places, and they took him up. And this trick alone in this video shaved over 200 feet off my landing roll. And I won't go into it today, but it's well worth the watch. Um, Honestly, you only need to watch the one section of the video, but it's all about angle of attack. And I'm not talking about hanging the airplane on the prop. It's just getting your angle of attack correct. And what that's all about is hitting your target. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But if you have a chance, have a look at it. And how are you with soft field landings? Lots of these places I land in, as I mentioned, the fat tires help, but when you need 1800 RPM to taxi, it's a soft field, and you got to have your technique down. Landing over obstacles. So 2 days ago, Sheldon and I went out to a field, and I've got no flaps on my airplane, but even those of you with flaps, um, you got to be able to get over these obstacles. And the best way to do that is slipping. And I know 172s say avoid slips with full flaps. Doesn't say don't do slips with full flaps. But the first time you're going to go do slips with full flaps, don't do them at 100 feet. Get up high and see what happens. So the reason they put that in there is with full flaps, you could blank out your rudder under certain conditions. Well, learn what those conditions are. I mean, my airplane's got no flaps, and I can do a comfortable 1,200 feet per minute descent. Yeah, okay, you air coupe guys are out of luck here, but oh, yeah. Does it? Okay, because I flew one and it didn't really do it. But again, this is practice, right? Get up there and practice your side slips. Get comfortable so that when you are 50 feet above the ground, 30 feet above the ground, you can still side slip. This is the biggest one and the one I had to work on the most, and that's hit your target. If I come in the Vagabond at 60 miles an hour and I rotate or I level out at the end of the runway, I float for 500 feet. That doesn't do me any good if I've only got 800 feet to work with or 1,000 feet. So get it down to where you can hit your target. When you watch that video, you won't be doing the smoothest landings. You will be, I call it the WestJet arrival. And Karen, Karen, who flies with me, every now and then I'll hear that was a nice landing or that was an arrival. And when I'm doing short field work, I'm good with arrival. I want that airplane down and stopped. I don't want to be floating and floating and floating. Nothing drives me more crazy than floating over 200-300 feet over my landing site. So this is kind of thing you're going to practice all of these at your home airport, right? Pick a target, hit it. Don't float past it. So try it again, try it again. I mean, Sheldon and I were talking the other day. There's a guy in Alaska. He's got a little Cub. It's got no cowling. It's got no fabric behind the cockpit. He generally wins his class. When he goes flying, he'll do like 100 touch and goes. He says before an event, he'll have logged 1,000 touch and goes to get that down perfect. So it's definitely well worth the practice. So learning your airplane how short you can land and take off. It's not important that you get that down as short as you can, but just know your airplane. And the reason for that is because then when you go off flying somewhere, you know the runways you can land at or the non-runways. And of course, density altitude affects that. The surrounding terrain affects it. If you got 200-foot tall trees, you need a longer runway. We'll go back there. Pause there for a sec. Does anyone have any questions around what we've talked about there? That's really the meat of the. Yes, Bruce. So that was an excellent question. I was going to cover it later, but we'll cover it now. So the question was, is after I've landed off airport, do I pace it out and see what I've got for room and give myself a go, no go spot? And I do exactly what Bruce said, and I'll go and pace it out. I'll back it off to where I know I can stop, and I'll put a stick on the ground. If I'm not off the ground by that stick, I'm stopping and we're trying something different. And something different might be offload some stuff. And again, we'll talk about that on the next slide, what you have to offload. Any other questions? Everybody still awake? You know, no, so because I pace it out, I basically know I can be off the ground. If I'm not off the ground in 500 feet and if I've got 500 feet left to go, I'm still okay because I know I can, like this thing, I know if I'm not off the ground, if I'm doing 45 mile an hour, I know I can get stopped in 200 feet unless it's real loose gravel. And loose gravel, or like today, the snow will affect that. So you need to know that too. So Dustin just made a comment about density altitude, and some people have lots of power, so they don't worry about it. I'm running 90 horsepower, so I do worry about it. And when you were down there at Dead Cow Lake a couple years ago, I flew down through Utah and I landed at a place called Green River. Green River is out in the middle of nowhere, and it's got about an 8,500-foot runway. And you can guess I landed at Green River because it had the cheapest fuel on my pass. So again, we're back to the cheapest thing in flying. So I landed there and I'm looking at it and going, why would they have an 8,000-foot runway? And then I listened to AWAS again, and the density altitude that day was 9,800 feet. And I got 200, I was with the Comanche, I got 260 horsepower. I used a lot of that runway. And no wonder they got 8,000-foot runways down there. And they tell you in all the AWASs in that area, they give you the density altitude, and it's well worth listening to. You got a question online? So, Master, what is the legality of off-airport takeoffs and landings? Only in Class G, maybe some Class E airspace. Well, I'm standing under a Class C umbrella today, and there's a couple nice little lakes just south of here. I can land on them legally. Even if I had to talk to Nav Canada, I could still land there. For most cases, what I tell people is it's good neighborship. Don't land on a farmer's field unless you've talked to them or you know them. That's always good. Rob and I were talking earlier this morning, and we were talking about his post a little while ago about landing at a provincial park, and that's a good lesson for all of us. Don't land at a provincial park unless you got permission. The chances of getting permission are probably pretty slim. But I mean, even Jasper's not a real airport, and we can land there. But yeah, that's the more the legalities around off airport is avoid federal parks, provincial parks. Don't think you can land in the North Saskatchewan in the middle of Edmonton. Um, Most of this stuff, honestly, Transport Canada deals with. Um, they don't go looking for problems. They wait till somebody complains. So if you're landing in fields in the middle of Edmonton, you're going to get complaints. You'll get in trouble. Even if everything you're doing is perfectly legal, you're still going to get in trouble. Yes, Bruce. Flyby E6B, Bruce is saying, has a good density altitude calculator. I'm pretty lazy these days. I've got Garmin Pilot, so it tells me on there. I haven't had to calculate forever. Good, we'll move on. Don't don't land at Elk Island National Park. Well, I think the park part gives it away, right? If you're going to land anywhere. I couldn't even find that one on a regular map. Yeah, but you know that ignorance of the law is no excuse ever. Well, we'll find out because I mean, I think it was great that Rob posted that because it does look like a nice place to land, right? There's lots of places that look nice, and yeah. At least if you got a video, Rob, of you peeing out there, you could say it was a precautionary. So one of the fellas, folks, one of the fellas online or one of the people online owns a quarter section 1 mile from an uncontrolled airport, and he wants to put a hangar up and a runway. So lots of folks have done that. You look at the old Didsbury Airport, and I'm so sorry. I just talked to the guy last weekend. I've already forgotten his name. He's got a runway maybe 3 miles from old Didsbury. So you, sorry, is it Minties? Is that what they call that one? Yeah. So there, lots of people do it. The best one, if you want to talk about a mile, is go to Camrose. That airport there, which has a parallel runway to Camrose, is maybe a mile and a half off. So yeah, anything's possible. Just I would suggest when you do it, you try and get it in the book so that people know it's there, and stay on the same frequency as the airport. My airport's in the middle of the Red Deer practice area, so my frequency I use is 122875 because that's the practice area frequency. We'll see what Nav Canada gives me for a frequency, but so let's talk about initial views of the landing site. So you want to go land somewhere you've never seen it before. You want to overfly at an altitude that allows you to see the obstacles, but not too high that you can't see it. I know that seems kind of ambiguous, but depends how good your eyes are. But the first pass, you're looking for large obstacles. So if we look in this picture, there's a rather large obstacle there. That's a tower. This is just outside Red Deer. The other thing you can expect just outside cities and towns is lots of power lines. And man, power lines are insidious. I can tell you story upon story about them. But your first pass, you want to be high enough. And here I'm high enough. This is the Red Deer Valley. You can see Joffrey just to the north there. I can see the power lines, but I'm not too low that I can get tangled up in them. I can also see the towers along the side. Yeah, yeah, very close to Canyon. Oh, at least, yeah. I'll show you another slide here. I've got them all. I mark them all on my thing. So here I'm looking at a uh, a river gravel bar. It looks pretty good, right? Well, if I didn't overfly it high enough, here's what it actually looks like. So you want to look for things like that on your first flight. Yeah. Sheldon knows where that is too. The field just to the right there is where I was trying to show that Ercoupe driver what rudder pedals were for. So Here's what I do on a you'll see Rob there. I actually clipped it off, but there's power 3, power 4. There was power 2, power 1 ahead of that. There's that bridge. Um, there's a gravel bar, gravel bar. I fly high enough and I mark all my power lines first, and then I go back and see. But if there's, like in that case, 2 power lines like that, I'm not even looking at that area for landings. And I fly with this iPad all the time, so that was one of my the green lines. One of my paths that day. I did a landing on a gravel bar. Looked at the other one. So now, after you've flown over it and you said, yeah, there's no power lines, no bridges, none of that kind of stuff, let's have a look at its length. So your first pass over is for length. So I use 60 miles an hour. My first run, it's just easy for my brain to understand. Um, yeah, ground speed I'm looking at. So you got the GPS out there, and I'm doing 60 miles an hour. I usually look for my first landing site is 1,000 feet. My plane, I can get in and out when I'm solo in under 300 feet. Um, but I do 1,000 feet because what if it's soft? What if there's something like that's going to slow me down? So when I use that, I look at 12 seconds. So 12 seconds is what's burned into my brain. I count off. Yeah, it's 12 seconds long. As an idea, I could use 50 miles an hour, and that same 1,000 feet would be 14 seconds. The math is easy, right? But I just put it on my knee board what I'm looking for, how many seconds I'm looking for. Second pass, you're going to look for real obstacles. So here's one of my favorite gravel bars, which, by the way, it was there on Monday, and when Sheldon and I flew over there on Thursday, it was gone. And it's been there all year. But you see the big rock and the stick, you want to make note of where those things are. They can make a day really bad for you. And this one's interesting. So this gravel bar looks pretty good, but right there is a fence. And this one took me 3 tries to see that fence. And it's just one where a farmer put some metal poles in and then strung a wire. But holy crow, would that have made my day bad. And that's the kind of things you want to look for. And it's usually not the power companies and stuff. It's usually a farmer is trying to keep his cattle in. And you'll see that all over, especially along the Red Deer River. Wind direction. I love this. How many people struggle with wind direction? So we have a lot available to us these days with wind direction. The biggest one we have is look at your airspeed indicator and look at your GPS. If they match up, there's not too much wind. If when you're on final, your airspeed indicator shows 60 and you're doing 80 miles an hour ground speed, guess what? You picked the wrong runway, right? So I always use that when I'm flying. It's not always perfect because you could be at 6,000 feet, you drop down and there's a wind shear and the wind is different. Um, Look for gravel, right? People driving on gravel roads, you get a pretty good idea. Joffrey plant doesn't do me bad because I can usually in the winter I can see the steam. Um, in the summer, you look at the lakes and you can see which way the wind is because the wind side is always super calm and then it picks up just past the trees. But you need to know the wind direction. So Dustin was just saying if you look at poplar trees, the shiny side showing where the wind is. So he's really low at this point, right? Really low. Now, Dustin flies really low for a living, so he's looking at me rolling my eyes, worrying about power lines and fences and stuff. But yeah, I mean, power lines definitely insidious. I've gotten really good at watching for them, Dustin, and that's not because I did it without not getting in trouble. Um, I fly the Red Deer River a lot, and there was one time, and I'll admit this to you folks, I was in my Nan Chang, and I'd just flown over my father's grave. I was headed back to Wetaskiwin, and I picked a different section of the Red Deer River. I thought, oh, this will be good. And I'm coming around the Red Deer River and doing 135 knots, and I just catch out of the corner of my eye power line. And the only thing that saved me was this side of the riverbank was really low, this side was really high, so I just tucked into the high side to come around it. But I should never have been there. You should never be there. If I'd have done what I'm talking about today, I'd have never been there, right? I'd have seen that power line and I'd have, but it's scary as hell because I mean, you look for the poles. I've landed on lots of gravel roads to have coffee with farmer friends. Most of them have a power line along them. If you see a house on the other side, that power line is crossing there, 100%. So you know you want to avoid that. If the power line's on the same side as the house, usually you know you're okay. But don't go by my word. So Dustin, for you online, Dustin just said one of the things to really watch for in power lines is off the pole there'll be a guy wire, and 9 times out of 10 there's a yellow plastic you can see, and usually that means a change in direction. So you might have the power line and you know you're good, you're paralleling it, but if you see that yellow, especially like let's say you're on the right side of the power line, you see it on the left side, that power line's probably changing directions in front of you to the right. Thanks, Dustin. That's good. Thanks for reminding me about that. The other thing you can look for wind direction in the winter is snow blowing. But know your wind direction before you're coming into land. It's a heck of a lot easier landing and taking off into the wind than it is going with the wind. Now, having said that, if you've got a hill you're landing on, I'll almost always, unless I've got a really strong wind, I'll land uphill and take off downhill, even if the takeoff means I'm going with the wind. And again, I've got 90 horsepower. I don't have a ton of horsepower out there. River valleys are real challenges with the winds. You might think you have the winds on top. You get down below and they're swirling, they've changed directions, they're coming down the valley. So you really got to watch that. I've been humbled a few times where I think I got the wind nailed and I get down in the river valley and it's completely different. It's swirling around and all of a sudden I'm looking down and I go, man, I'm tracking fast now, and look up at the GPS and yeah, I'm with the wind. So keep an eye on that. Of course, if you've got all that nailed down, it's time to put your practice to work. Get out there and pick a field and try it. One thing that I got caught on not very long ago, like only a couple weeks ago, was slow flying in your engine. So when I'm tracking down the Red Deer River looking at these gravel bars, I'm not doing 95 miles an hour. I'm usually doing 60 miles an hour. So the engine is back at 2100 RPM. First thing it's doing is it's loading up. Usually I've got the mixture rich. Well, if I'm going to fly at 2100 RPM for a while, I've got to lean out the mixture. And where I got caught is I was playing around and not really, I was down low, punched the throttle, and I got the, and I'm like, oh man. And I was loaded up. I didn't lean out the engine that day. And of course, carb heat, you got to watch that as well. But if you are slow flying, look after your engine a bit. Our engines aren't designed to run at 50%, 45% power. They're meant to run up at 60, 70% power, 75%. And don't be afraid to go around. I'll tell you, even my first landings on these gravel bars, it was 4 or 5 or 6 approaches until I got it nailed. That I mean, if I rounded out and I started floating, I went around. I was like, okay, get it down to where you're landing where you want to be. There's no harm in going around. Just know how to go around. Know your air speeds. Know how your airplane feels. Again, something to practice at home. Oh, sorry. So I want to check my notes so I didn't miss anything. So what can go wrong? And again, I'm the guy to tell you, anything that can go wrong, I've done it, I think. So you've got pretty confident in off-airport landings, so you're going to take a passenger out. Um, on Halloween weekend, I met a family at Lacombe. The guy's name is Ryan. I don't know if he's online, but I thought it was interesting. He was flying up to Camrose, and actually it was the day before I met him. But he was going to take the family to Camrose for that Halloween fly-in. And he told me his wife has a rule that he has to go fly to that airport first, check it all out, and land and come home. And I thought, man, is that ever a good rule? It would keep me from looking stupid if I did that every time, rather than going in and, damn, what's the frequency here again, and everything else, right? You look dumb in front of a passenger. But I'm just saying, if you're going to go land off field, I'd suggest the first few times you go into a field, do it solo. Know that your airplane can do it. I mean, all of our airplanes here, well, maybe not Dustin's, but all of us regular airplanes perform far different when you throw a passenger in the seat. They definitely take twice as long to get off the ground, at least mine does. So Dustin's just sharing that even in his 180, he's having 2 passengers on board makes it a different airplane. But definitely, and so let's say you do go into a place with a passenger, and you go to take off, and you roll past your stick. Now what? Well, sometimes your passenger gets to stay there, and I've done it before where the passenger gets to watch me do a few circuits while I'm burning off fuel to get the airplane light enough that I can get out of there. The other thing that happens we'll talk about is you go to a place in the morning, and those of you that fly in and out of like Ram Falls, you go in the morning, things are pretty good. You try and take off in the afternoon, and bang, back to our density altitude discussion. So you may have to leave a passenger. In worst case is you have to leave a passenger and come back and get them another day. So, and that's happened. So what else can go wrong? Well, if you're going to play off field, you could do damage. Are you prepared for it? So this little damage on my airplane, a piece of duct tape got me home. Even metal airplanes, duct tape will get you home if you put a hole in it. So I carry a roll of duct tape. I carry blue duct tape, of course, because then nobody else can tell I did something stupid. This one I just posted a week ago, but I took a pretty good rock chip off airport. And like I said, I've got great clearance. I must have 14 inches, and I still took a big rock chip there. Luckily, again, it's a home built prop I can repair. But those of you with certified airplanes and you want to go play, you might be paying. Take a big chip like this out of a constant speed prop. Yeah, it's pricey. You may be buying a new blade. That chip was just over half an inch. Carbon fiber prop, yeah. And the factory told me how to repair it, which I did. And you can go look at it today. You can't find that repair. That repair is so nice. I already mentioned, what if you can't get out? You've landed and you can't get out. Well, I said offload your passenger, but you might want to offload other things first. Usually the passengers, at least the ones I fly with, are not happy if I leave them behind. So I might offload if I've got lunch with me or whatever. I might offload all that stuff first. And again, the big thing that I noticed, especially with my little 90 horse airplane, is go flying and burn off fuel. Still have enough to get to the next airport, but burn off enough that you can get off the ground comfortably with your passenger. It happens. So again, we talked about, are you prepared for the worst? So what if you get out there and that chip I had, it took the whole end of the prop off? Well, I'm not going anywhere. So I'll tell you something here that may save you a bunch of money in the future. If you end up in that situation, you got to leave your airplane there, hire an AME to go get your airplane. And the reason I say that is I've seen 2 airplane recoveries where the owner was involved and there was far more damage done to those 2 airplanes recovering them than should have been. There shouldn't have been any damage. And the reason for that is because we all have pride. We don't want our airplane left there. Actually 3, because one of the recoveries was me. And I did more damage getting my airplane out of a canola field than I did putting it in. And I didn't want it in that field. I didn't want the neighbors seeing it, right? So I sold my Nanchang, and the guy that bought it, I told him that if you ever gear this thing up, walk away, call your AME, go drink some wine. And he called me about 4 years later and said, guess what, Jeff? I geared up. And I'm so glad you told me to walk away, because all he wanted was that airplane off the runway anyway. He said, I'd have been willing to drag it off the runway, and he'd have done way more damage. He said, since he got his AME out, they closed the airport, and they took their time, and they did no damage to that airplane recovering it. But I know all of us folks, we don't want somebody to see it and everything else. Flight plans. So I don't file flight plans when I'm playing around on the Red Deer River. I do, however, leave a piece of paper for Karen showing her where I'm flying, where I'm planning on landing, to make sure. But if I'm with Karen, the flight plan's filed. So conditions. Some of the things we haven't talked about today is wildlife. Um, Here, probably 6 months ago, I was just rounding out to land, and I caught a flash of a deer in front of me, and he went, or she went under the left wing. How I missed that thing, I don't know, but the worst time to hit a deer is right when you're rounding out. Wheels weren't on the ground. I mean, I'd have been flipped over. You gotta look for that. Now I buzz that area, buzz the trees to scare any deer out, and then I go land. But that happens, right? Conditions change. Just because I mentioned that one gravel bar that you saw the pictures of, it's gone today. It was there a week ago. The river rose. The Red Deer River's way up right now, and I think that last little snow. But I was hoping all these gravel bars now with a little bit of ice, like in the shallows, the water's frozen right to the ground. It would extend the gravel bars, and it's done the opposite because the whole river came up. So now I've lost the gravel bars, and any ice that's there is rough as can be. Sorry, so is there any other questions about what can go wrong, or any questions? Bears are wildlife. Yeah, especially fabric airplanes. Bears don't like fabric airplanes, or they like them. But I mean, everyone saw that on the internet. The thing I learned from that was don't put fish in the back of your airplane and leave your airplane alone. It's just like your food. I mean, I learned in Cub Scouts, if you're out in the bush, hang your food up. If you stick it in your airplane, well, you kind of get what you get. Oh, so you're saying bears like Taylor crafts, eh? So something I forgot to mention about what can go wrong, and again, this is because I can do it. So one day I went out in the bush and one of my first off airport landings, I was pretty excited. I landed and got out and took some pictures, went for a little walk and had some lunch and came back and guess what dummy left his master on? So I carry one of these with me now always. It came out of the back of the airplane. It's just one of those little booster packs. Weighs maybe a pound, but it saved my bacon because I apparently I didn't learn that time, so I did it once more. But second time I had this, and I haven't used it since. But some of the things you can get in trouble with. Um, when my airplane had the metal prop on, I could hand prop it, but with this warp drive, I just and three blade, I just can't do it. So it does charge cell phones, yet for sure. So let's talk about ski flying. Now, I love ski flying. I really do. Last year kind of turned me off a little bit because of all the drifts and stuff we had. But when you're ski flying, your initial checks are exactly the same, right? Look for power lines, look for bridges. Again, those darn fences, because most of the time I like to land on the edge of lakes and such, because that's usually where the snow's the best, and that's where the farmers put the fences as well. But honestly, in the winter, if we get some snow, Alberta's just one big landing spot. Especially like the Chain Lakes are great, the Wizard Lake, all these little lakes. I mean, Coal Lake alongside Wetaskiwin, I could do 20 touch and goes along the length of that. I really do love it. But some of the things you need to know, like how thick is the ice? Um, and in certain cases, the ice might look thick, but there's some things to watch for, like where the town takes their water from. If you're like in Coal Lake, Wetaskiwin takes their water from a section, I don't land there at all because it's always the ice is thinner. Um, every year somebody goes through the ice, right? We don't want to be those people. I mean, most of the time you see the airplanes, they break through and then the wings keep them up, but I don't know how you recover that easy, but um, there was a nice post on Alberta General Aviation just a couple days ago showing the ice thickness and the pictures, but you don't necessarily know that when you're flying by. So usually what I look for is if there's a truck parked in the middle of the lake and he's ice fishing, I'm pretty comfortable to play on that lake. Um, some things to watch for though, like if you're looking down at a lake and you see a wet spot in it, they could have springs in the lake. Stay away from that and give yourself lots of room from that. Again, I'm pretty shy on lakes. I stay near the edges. Usually the edges freeze first and thaw last, so I'm usually much safe. Yeah, yeah, they melt too. But once they're melting, I'm done ski flying. It's like hockey, right? We want hockey early in the season, but once it's warm, get rid of hockey. Did you see where my bag went? My bag? My bag? Just my battery's running low. Oh, there's. So I should have a charger in there. Sorry, folks, my computer says it's low battery. No, I got a power cord. I just got to get it out. Unless I already took it out. Not on the here. Shine it in there. Let's have a look in there. There it is. Yeah. So Rose was telling a nice story about how they landed a couple years ago on Buck Lake and made a nice strip. And then all the ice fishermen thought that was a great area, so they drilled all the holes in it, which I've seen that before. Yeah, so Bruce is saying like inflows and outflows from lakes, that ice is always thinner. I always avoid those. Even, I mean, rivers and stuff, to me, it's pretty iffy. I'd rather land in a field beside the river and walk down. But let's see, what else do we got? Are there any thin spots? We talked about that. Drifting. So, drifting is a bad problem we have down south here. We don't have as many trees. I'll tell you, we talked about that airplanes don't have suspension on them. When you throw skis on, they really don't have suspension. And must be 3 years ago now, I broke a landing gear because of drifting. And it's pretty easy to do. So, what I found, if you take most of the lakes in this area, and there's trees along the west or the north, that's the places you can land because the prevailing wind is usually northwest. I don't know what's been going on this year with all the south wind, but usually in the winter it's from the northwest. So kind of stick to the west side of the lake or the north side, especially along trees. You'll find the best snow. Be careful around snowmobile tracks. Snowmobilers love to stop, and then when they gun it, it piles up a pile of snow. That stuff is as hard as a drift, and it is no fun to hit. So I don't land on any snowmobile tracks. I try to make my own tracks off to the side. Sorry? Ice skis, yeah. High seas, oh yeah. So, and they've already started this year. Like I see a lot of the lakes are already starting to crack and the ice is coming over top. But again, on your first inspections, look for that and find it. So often your landings and takeoffs can be longer, not necessarily at the same time. One of my first ski flights, I took young Sheldon here. By the way, Sheldon just turned 51 yesterday. It was his birthday yesterday, so if anyone wants to wish him a happy birthday, yeah, he's now an old man, but young to me. But Sheldon and I landed in a powdery field one day. We found powder, and it was about 3 feet of powder. Our landing was really short, and luckily I didn't stop. I just kept going. It took us 3 tries to get out of that field, and each time we just went back in the same tracks, looped around back, and it took 3 tries till we could get it packed down enough to get off. I've heard lots of stories where people have landed and then they've had to pack their own path down, walking out, two people walking back and forth. That happens. Snowshoes is awesome to have when you're skiing. Yeah, you can make your own runway. But it's something to plan for. So, like I said, I mean, my airplane can get off the ground in 300 feet when I'm solo. On skis, I usually plan for 2,000 feet. But again, on skis and on lakes, usually there's way more runway than you have available to you on most off field landings. So Dustin's question was some old bush pilots, they'll land and then they'll swing around and they'll look for floodwater. I will say, in all my years of ski flying in at least the southern Alberta, we don't seem to get that overflow like they do in either BC or Ontario. But what I always do is I land first and I just do a touch and go and I fly the circle around and then I look down and see, do I have water in my tracks? And it's a good habit. This first time I've ever been on a lake or in that area, that's exactly what I do. Yeah. Yeah, I do it flying. I usually won't circle on the ice. I'll just take off and then look again, and if it looks good, then I'll land back there. But you can do it either way. You can definitely circle and look as well. It'd be bad though if you had 2 feet of water there when you're circling. So for ski flying as well, you have to have a plan. What if something goes wrong? Oh, yes. So Dustin's just saying on cloudy days, you miss that perception. You can't see a drift. Everything's the same color, and it is a bit insidious. Those days, I'm like you, Dustin. Sometimes I just won't even go flying unless I go to where I've been. Yeah, ex- yeah, yeah, exactly. So someone once told me that ski flying is a lot of work until, or a lot of fun until it's a lot of work, and that's true. So here's a picture of an airplane that's owned by an AGA member now. Um, but this is what happens if you hit a drift or something on. This is on Coal Lake as well. Well, that day of fun turned into years of work, but it ended up they rebuilt the whole airplane at that point. But even recovering that airplane is a lot of work. So if you wanna play, you get to pay in both time and money sometimes. Yes, Landon. Yeah. So Landon was saying last year he hit in the spring he hit a drift and it was quite water saturated and it folded his ski. And this does happen. I mean it's but again, I mean makes you wonder why we do any of this stuff, right? Well, I'll tell you first off for me a lot of it's about pushing my envelope. You don't learn until you're out there pushing it. Well, you got to gently push it. Exactly. I mean, nothing today I said, well, there's a nice spot. Let's go down and land immediately, right? I mean, it was about looking it over. I made sure I know the airplane limitations. I know my limitations, but my limitations don't expand unless you try new things. So that's one of the reasons I do this. I get to visit lots of cool new areas, but like a buddy of mine said, and what do you do when you go there? You land, you get out, you take some pictures, and you leave. Like, what's the big deal, Jeff? I said, yeah, I know, but some days I do take a picnic lunch out. Yeah. Well, not only, so Dustin was saying we got the most scenic pea spots, but believe it or not, we also have the most scenic, peaceful spots around. You land there, you shut off the airplane there. It's just like you're in your whole own world. And I mean, for you guys, especially you single guys, the ladies just love some guy with fat tires. You can take her out into the bush, feed her a picnic lunch. She thinks you're just the greatest in the world. And And I mean, what guy doesn't like a lady who has an airplane with fat tires, right? I mean, there's no question. There's reasons to do this and have fun. I mean, you guys can ask Sheldon. I took him out 2 days ago. We did some off-airport work, and he had a ball. He told me I can quote him that he had lots of fun, even if his poor little legs couldn't run the rudder pedals. It was still okay. I didn't know. So this was my first off-airport landing with the Vagabond after I put the fat tires on, and that's the one that resulted from that other picture of the water takeoff. Like I say, it was very muddy. It doesn't look muddy, but it was amazing how soft that. Like it looks like it should be hard, but it isn't. It's like an alkali. That's Red Deer Lake. I landed alongside. This one, my uncle had borrowed my little excavator, so I thought I'd go visit him to see what was going on. And luckily, this field had been, it was a canola field, had been harvested. It's no fun landing in a canola field that hasn't been harvested. And again, I can attest to that. Yeah, it was my shortest landing ever, ever. It did nose over, but like I say, the problem was, is then I went in with my pickup truck and hooked onto the tail wheel and just drug it out. And I did more damage to the tail feathers than I'd done to the front of the airplane going in. But I didn't want my neighbors to see. This was my favorite gravel bar. It's about 1,200 feet long. This is the one I posted. The guy just up to the left side, he's yelling at me, come land in my field. And I go look at his field, and he's got like maybe 800 feet with a cross fence and tall trees. It's like, yeah, that ain't happening. But he figured I should come talk to him, and he could see the airplane. And that's the gravel bar now. It's completely gone, like completely. So I've done this for free. So here's my sales speech. If anyone wants to go do this in the wild, I'm available for hire. I am a flight instructor. We can either do it in your airplane or my airplane. I don't care. I'm good for that. Just drop me an email or phone me. What's that? So those are wheel skis, yeah, retractable wheel skis. It was such a pain. I had straight skis, so you dolly it on, you drive it out to the runway, you shut down, you dolly it off, you fire it back up after you've pushed it onto the snow. And so finally I put on a set of these retractable wheel skis. And yeah, they're heavier and slower, but you have a little bit of suspension because you got a tire there. But at least I can land on a paved airport, and I can land off on the, I think that's Coal Lake there, but it might not be. Mm, electric. So it's an electric ram that pulls it back. So that's the end of my official slideshow. An hour and 25 minutes, it tells me. So now I'm open to questions from either online or. Yeah, so someone online said for safety gear, it's better to be worn than anything. And Rob would probably also comment on that. I have a vest at home that I've been building up, and lots of guys suggest that. There was a really good video, and it was about a Garmin InReach. I think it might be the same one you were talking about, Dustin, where these guys went down, and this guy said that he had his vest. I think this was the one. He had it sitting on the back of his seat. And so then he went out and he got halfway to where the guy had crashed. And he's like, crap, went back and got his vest. And he's like, if you're wearing it, you got it. And if you're the person that crashes, you might not be able to go back if your plane's on fire. So if you can build up something that everything is on you when you get out, it's still with you. Even these, the InReaches or the spots have a clip, and you'll see lots of people wearing them on their vests, so they've still got it when they leave the airplane. Yeah. So what Rose was talking about was on the BC General Aviation site. They've got a survival shakedown. And what you do is you go out, you take your airplane, and you have to survive with what you've got in it for a survival kit. Just doing it for the online guys. So we're just talking about whether that's something we could do. But yeah, I mean, it would be cool to see whether. I mean, I did it once with when I was part of Casera. We did a weekend like that, and it is survive. It is amazing. I mean, 90% of it is learning what you can do with what's around you to survive. There's a question online that I'm going to ask someone, and maybe Dustin can help me with it, because I actually don't know it for sure. And that's when float flying and waterways, what are the regulations around it? Okay. Nobody knows in the room here. I don't know if anyone knows online. Yeah, if it was in the middle of a federal park, it's probably not allowed. So Dustin was just saying in general, unless it's marked, you can't do it. You can now. Um, I was pleasantly surprised when I was in Nelson here this last summer. They've got one dock that's marked float planes only. Well, and their dragon boat on one side, but float planes only. I thought that's perfect. It was nicely locked up and everything, but they're right on a river there, so as boats. Yeah, same rules as boats. Yes. Yeah. So Kyle commented, and it's kind of what I've been talking about today. I don't care what plane you fly, bush or not. I want you to enforce the fact that you should know your plane, perform in as many configurations, how to turn the tightest canyon turns, glide ratios, wing overs, stall speeds, everything you can think of. And that's again what we were talking about is upper air work. You really get to know that airplane, and especially on the edges. Um, I mean, you can do wing overs below stall speed, right? I mean, in my old airplane, I'd be looping, and at the top of the loop, I'm well below my stall speed, and I'm not stalling. I'm carrying around. But know your airplane, right? Like, know what it'll do. And again, that's what I was saying. It doesn't matter what you fly. I mean, there's people in this room with 182s, which, in my opinion, are probably the worst bush plane in the world. And you can go to almost all these places I've been to. And I'm sorry I said that about 182s, but the reason is most 182s they put a small nose wheel on them. It's the same geometry as a 172, but the engine weighs way more. And a few years ago, we had a COPA convention in Wetaskiwin. So of course we had a 1 in 100 year rain, and there was all these airplanes parked on the grass. Navians taxied out, Cessna 310s taxied out. Every time we went to move a 182, it just the nose gear just dove for the ground. It's just so heavy on the nose gear. But I mean, most of these fields, especially right now, you could land in them no problem. They're not soft right now. They're hard. But yeah, know your airplane. Don't go up there and fly around like just going from one place to another. Practice a couple steep turns in the way. Practice some slow flight. Learn the envelope. Do it at an altitude you can recover. Does that kind of hit the nail there, Kyle? He says, okay, good. So Bruce is saying don't only practice the slow flight and stuff, but because we're flying single engine airplanes, practice your engine outs. What's your glide ratio? Can you make that field? Again, know your airplane, right? And you'll be amazed that an airplane at idle flies differently than an airplane with the engine off. And again, I can tell you that. It's quite a different attitude, and it's surprising how steep sometimes you have to push the nose over to maintain glide speed. Not what you'd expect. But the best I can suggest is practice it at idle. Don't shut the engine off on purpose. Yeah, so Jerry's saying warn your wife. So I used to, and John knows this. I used to have a habit in my Comanche is I'd run a tank dry before switching when I was on long cross countries. I'd let it run out, and the engine would cough, and I'd switch tanks, flick on the boost pump, and we'd fire back up again. And I was informed not long ago, you're never doing that again. So that's actually cost me a bit of money because I've installed new fuel senders and a proper fuel gauge. So I know when I've got a gallon left, I've got a gallon left. But you know what? She's 100% right. What if that engine didn't catch? Well, I'm like, it's going to catch. It's got other fuel. But we've seen crashes where one tank is right full and the other one's dry. So I I don't usually practice engines out or my steep turns or any of that stuff with my passenger. But if I do, I warn her that we're going to do this. I mean, the other thing I'm not allowed to do anymore is I'm not allowed to drift. So I I posted the other day a video of me landing on ice. Now, what you guys need to know is that lake has from about the first 60 feet on the shore has 2 inches of water. I went out there and checked. The ice was right to the ground, so I didn't have. It wasn't unsafe, but I was drifting around the corner, and I'm not allowed to drift anymore either. So apparently that's bad. Yes, Dustin. I can't believe your dad told you that. Let me just share this one with online, Dustin. So when you guys speak, nobody online can hear it. So Dustin just shared that one of the habits he had with his old Super Cub, and it was a rockin' Super Cub. He could take off in 200 feet fully loaded, and one of the habits he had is he'd just land and he'd take off from wherever he landed until his dad gave him grief, use the whole runway. And everyone knows that, but sometimes we don't. No. Yeah. Yeah. Your airplane doesn't know it's going to hit something. So, Dustin, what Dustin shared there, and this is something that I've seen a lot of the YouTubers posting real recently, Dustin, is after you take off, once you've cleared your obstacle, go to best rate of climb. So, what the YouTubers are some of the more reputable ones are complaining about is everybody's doing that. They take off and then they do the maximum angle of climb because it looks great. And what happens if your engine quits? You've got no options. There's nothing there, right? I mean, you're pushing forward and hoping for the best. And I'll tell you, somebody said it once that hope is not a plan. Have a plan. So Dustin shared that at one of the runways, he taxied to the back of it, 4,000-foot runway, lifted off in a real short time, and then leveled out the plane into a normal climb, and the engine coughed and quit halfway down the runway. I'm betting you that that sticks in your mind. I mean, that's you'll never do that again where you do the maximum rate of climb because reinforced it. So there's a guy online. There's a guy online, and I'm trying to emulate him, but I'm going to have to go back to work and I'm going to shave. But he's got the greatest beard online, so you probably know who he is, Dustin. But he wants to know the story of about a frozen fuel line. That's the one. Okay, so yeah, Mike, that was the one where he uh, he luckily didn't do a maximum rate of climb, and so Dustin's saying the reason that his fuel line froze is he didn't sump his fuel that day. So he didn't check for water in the fuel line and it froze on him. So it doesn't have to be this time of year for that to happen to you. I mean, our engines, they need kind of three things to run, right? They need air, they need a spark, and they need fuel. If you feed it water, so far water's not a fuel, right? So I'm unfortunately I'm a lot like you, Dustin. I fuel up at the same airport, so I trust it. But a guy is surprised every now and then when he tests it, and it's like, holy crap, there is water in there. Picked it up. So one of the person online asked when landing at airports during the winter, other than tenting the engine, what other recommendations? So I'm sure some of you folks in the crowd have some. I can tell you one from an experience. My airplanes stay hangared all the time, and I was in Salmon River, Idaho, which some of you that fly down through that area have stopped in. A good friend of mine had a gear up there, so he knew Salmon River as well. I came out of Salmon River one day, and my ailerons were frozen. So what am I doing? I did my run up. You check your controls, and I did. I had checked my controls, but I'd added onto this airplane, I'd added gap seals, and it had rained overnight, and the rain ran into the wings and ran along the gap seals. And as I climbed through the freezing level, my ailerons froze. So I've added it to my list to check that even on the ground, like I go around, check all my controls are free and there's no water in them if it's that kind of a situation. But what other tips do we have for folks doing winter flying? I mean, dress for the weather, right? Tent your engine. So warm de-ice fluid and a sponge isn't a bad idea, especially if you get some, if it's the right weather, you'll get sticky snow, sticky frost on the wings. Bruce? So what Bruce said was some of the things that happen in the winter, especially, is we shorten our walkarounds, and we all do it. It's cold out. Force yourself to do a good walk around. I'll tell you from personal experience, the time you shorten your walk around is the time something will happen. It's without fail. Bernie, I can't believe you're online and in the room, but maybe you can tell me what the question. A question came online. What are you using for de-ice? Well, we can kick on a light or two right now because we're done with the presentation. So nobody wants to see me anyway, Bernie. So what Bernie said he uses is he apparently works for Canadian Tire, so he uses Canadian Tire blue windshield washer fluid and he sticks it in the microwave and warms it up, and he says that takes everything off the plane. And Bernie's had to be outside a bit. Yeah, I used to use methyl hydrate all the time, but I think nowadays that's not environmentally friendly, where the blue windshield washer fluid would be more environmentally friendly. Yeah, garden sprayer. So Dustin just added buy a good garden sprayer, and I'll back in the day when I had my airplane outside, that's exactly what I had. Yeah, market aircraft de-icing. Roundup doesn't work for de-icing then. One of the fellows online, great fellow I think, because his name's Jeff, but he uses bulk hand sanitizer. Easy to get, right? Yeah. So Rob's saying, and Sean, I'll get to you here in a second. Rob's saying uh, when you land on a lake, it's not a bad idea to get those ice screws that the ice climbers use. Oh, my grandma's on this Zoom too. Huh? She is. 103-year-old grandma checking out the off airports operations. My grandma's on online too. Hi, grandma. Yeah. So Shauna asked online, how do you do run-ups if you're on skis? So um, Rob and I were talking about this earlier, and uh, Glenn would be happy to hear this too. But if you take an example like the Red Deer Forestry Strip, he's getting upset that idiots are going to the end and doing a run up against the fence, which is knocking down the which what are they the delineators there. Do a rolling run up. You can get 1700 RPM, and most of the time when you're on skis, again, you're not on a 3,000-foot runway. You're on a 23,000. I mean, 15-mile long lake. You can do a rolling run up just fine. Sorry, say that again, Dustin. Yeah. Yeah, so Dustin's saying a rolling run up, the mags show up a lot more. And the other comment too, and Kyle's mentioned it, um, I used to run out of gravel strip all the time. And the first time I did a run up, I discovered how hard it was on the prop. So I learned. From then on, I was rolling before I did it, and I never saw a rock chip as well. And you gotta watch it. Sometimes your run up might be harder on your airplane. Yeah. Yeah, and it just sucks it straight up into the prop. Yeah. Are you guys landing on lakes with wheels too? So last year I had my skis on, and there's a fella out of Cooking Lake who's got a lovely Blanca Scout. I really want one now because first off, it's built for bigger people in the front, but he had the 210 horsepower, only a couple years old. And I landed on my skis, and he came in and landed on his fat tires beside me and goes, "What do you have skis for?" But yeah, last year was a bad year. It was really rough. I could have landed with my fat tires all year round. I still love the skis though. There's nothing like a fresh powder landing. It's like you're the best pilot in the world when you land on 6 inches of powder. Um, but yes, yeah, and I did mention freshwater springs and lakes earlier, but if you see, and there is a lake not far from here down by Millet that when you look down, you'll see wet spots all over it, and those are springs. And usually on that lake, I'll see a snowmobile track and then a big mess, and it looks like they've had to tow it back out. So that's a good spot to avoid. So we're just talking about skis freezing down. So, with these new, let's not call it Teflon because that's not the right word, the PTFE bottoms, it's not near as bad as the metal. But what lots of people do is they'll just grab some branches and just push the plane up onto a branch or two. I find with the PTFE, if I've been there for a couple hours, I just grab the tail and wiggle it a bit, and it's a lot less. Dave Watson says when he was up north doing those air shows, he was on gravel runways and he always did rolling run-ups and he never had any problems. So, and Mike Edgar says same as a float plane. How can you do a standing run-up, right? You're already going. And it does, when you're moving, it does protect the prop. Okay, I think that's it then. Now we can do airplane BS sessions. Wait, yeah, okay, thank you. Well, and Landon and Tony for the facility, and Todd. Todd's got this, you should see his screen here. He's got us well under control. Sorry, Bernie, do you have another question? Okay, guys, online, we're just starting to BS now, so thank you everybody for joining. Jim, Jim Moore. I'm impressed with your online name. Not bad. We had 29 people online. How many do we have here? Nobody knows. 20 here? Oh, that's good. Excellent. Everyone online, we're going to sign off. Thanks for joining. I hope everyone found something useful out of today. I like it because I got to fly here. Anytime I can fly, I'm happy. Hopefully I can fly home. Yeah.